In the fog of war, social media can spread important updates about the violence and the people caught up in it. But as we've already begun to see in the conflict between Israel and Hamas, it can spread dangerous misinformation too. Take the explosion at a hospital in Gaza City yesterday, which Palestinian officials blamed on an Israeli airstrike, a story that spread like wildfire on social media. But Israel blames a failed rocket launch by the militant group Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and President Joe Biden says U.S. intelligence appears to back up Israel's claims. So how can we differentiate the truth from fiction? To discuss, I'm joined by Charlie Sennott, founder of the Ground Truth Project, the home of the Report for America initiative. Charlie, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
So, Charlie, you reported for the Middle East for many years. Tell us what it's like to report a fast-breaking news story like this one in the region.
You know, I think the truth is hard work. To get the truth on the ground amid the tensions, the violence, the emotions that are running so high in Israel, of course, and also, of course, in Gaza. All I can say is it's extremely difficult. You know, the famous axiom of war, that the first casualty of war is the truth, really feels relevant in these very moments. And I would tell you, I remember being a reporter there, based there for the Boston Globe for many years, and when you're on the scene of a bombing, the emotion and this incredible sense of the loss of innocent lives is really heavy. And I'll never forget the first day I arrived at work in Jerusalem in 1997. It was one of the big bus bombings in the markets. And the first image I ever saw was the hand of a young girl with blue nail polish underneath a partial tarp. She had just been covered up. She was gone. She was dead. And the remnants of the blast were just there. It was very immediate aftermath, walking on crushed glass. You feel it. It's very intense. It's very hard to get at what is accurate. But eventually what we learned was that was a Hamas bombing. That was one of the really big bus bombings. And I think about that. I think about what Hamas has become, where that all went, how the peace process fell apart. These shards, these incredible shards that just blow apart in a scene like this terrific terrorist, or accidental, we'll find out, strike that happened at the hospital is almost unfathomable to imagine. So I feel for, of course, everyone, the killed, those who were there trying to figure it out. I also really feel for the journalists on the ground and the pressure and the tension and the effort to get it right. And I know there are really good journalists there on the ground trying to do that.
So far too many people are going to have the experience that you just described, have had it and will have it in the next few weeks. So as we think about what happened with this story, I mean, something clearly went very, very wrong, with a viral claim about 500 casualties going all around the world that seems to have been walked back. We don't have a number. We don't really know who did it, although the evidence seems to be leaning towards a misfire missile. To the extent that we know, what do you think went wrong here?
Look, I don't know. And I think that's maybe the biggest thing I learned in covering the Middle East is you don't know what you know until you really know it. And we certainly saw that in the immediate aftermath of this. It was immediately blamed on Israel. It does look like the early intelligence, and I'm interested that U.S. officials keep calling it preliminary. So I think we need to hear that. We need to think about that. But overhead imagery, open source, and intercepts would indicate that this is indeed an accidental strike by Islamic Jihad. They were launching a rocket. The rocket misfired. It came down into a place they didn't intend it to, which appears to be the parking lot of the hospital. And that has caused a lot of deaths. It's caused a lot of injuries. And as you say, we don't know the number. But that seems to be what happened. But I guess in terms of what do you learn covering the Middle East, keep working hard, keep staying right on it, stay on the ground, keep trying to dig for what you know, and only report what you know.
So, I mean, I hope that that's guidance. And obviously we had it here where a summit that was meant to get humanitarian relief to the Palestinians has been canceled because of the reports. And then let me then build on this last set of questions, right? So when the stakes are this high,
yes,
at the same time, when all the eyes of the world, right, all the commercial incentives are to sort of go for clicks, there's got to be an enormous amount of pressure to get the story right first.
Right.
And the cost of, when the cost of getting it wrong might be paid far down the line. What's your suggestion to reporters about how to, sort of how to push back against that, get the eyes and do their job and get the story right?
I think we have to push back against the machine and all the algorithms that want to keep driving us to go faster and faster in our reporting. You know, like I said, this is an ancient axiom of war from ancient Greece that said, first casualty of war is the truth. Now the difference, the thing that makes it feel so much worse now is the veracity, just how the velocity and voraciousness of lies now move at just incalculable speeds. We've never had it like this before, where in an instant the whole world is told something that could be wrong. Journalists need to know that. They need to know that the work they do when they carefully write a lead like a New York Times reporter would, or they carefully lead a broadcast like the NewsHour would, that even when you're tweeting or you're working in social media, that's the same standards and practices of get it right. And you have to bring that. And we work with a lot of journalists who are sort of next generation journalists, and we work with journalists around the world and through Report for America. And we are really trying to teach that your social media is an extension of your actual journalism. So I would say that's the key. I'd say in the moment we live in, right now, what I'm worried about is that these days we live in what I would call a post-truth era. It's a phrase that's been coined. It's used a lot. But what it really means is a time when emotions and ideologies supersede discernible facts. That's post-truth. And that's a horrifying era. And we're in it. And social media has a lot to answer for how we got here. But I think journalists have an opportunity and an obligation to get it right now and to get back to the basics, to the good old-fashioned journalism of get there on the ground and do your best to report what you know.
So this is the issue on which there's probably more pressure, where essentially any statement you make will get one side or the other, or possibly both, going after you as evidence of bias. I'll say, of anything I've ever talked about, this is the one where I am most careful about what I say for exactly that reason.
Yep.
And how do you tell how do you personally deal with, and how do you tell reporters to deal with that fact that essentially there are people whose entire organizational initiative is to go after you, to work the refs, as it were?
It's a great question, and I don't know that I have any advice that's going to really help. But I do know I feel that sense of caution, and I would add it's good caution. It's a complex place. It's a long history. How you understand the moment we're in has to begin with how you define the history and where you begin your definitions of that history. You go back to the Holocaust. You go back to the very early days of the Israeli state and the way Palestinians were pushed out of these areas. Most of the refugees in Gaza are from the 1948 lines. Do you go back to 67 and do you go back to this is the moment? Or do you go back to the peace process that was once so hopeful that now seems truly shattered and in shards on the ground with all of the destruction that has happened in both Israel with the attack by Hamas, which we need to begin with in this recent episode, and then now with the horrific loss of life in the retaliatory strikes by Israel. I think Biden had it right. This is President Biden at his best. He's a very emotional guy. He's a healer, and he loves to comfort people. And I think seeing him stay very clearly, we need to stand with Israel, is the right thing. I think seeing him turn the corner to say we also need to tell Israel, like our brothers, you can't let the rage consume your judgment. Secretary of Defense Austin put it really well when he said, this is a time for resolve, not revenge. And I think we play a role in that. I think we also have to be really quick to say, not only do we support Israel, we also support the peace process, which this country did so much to give shape to, and to pull the two sides together. And we need to remind them both that peace process feels a very, very long way away. But the goal has to be, we have to think toward peace.
So I mean, it was striking to see President Biden say, we were enraged after 9/11. Don't make our mistakes.
That was incredible. A very self-effacing moment.
And so when I think about that, right, he's trying to put things in a context. He's trying to exercise empathy, right? A sort of a famous Biden strength.
Right.
But he's also trying to do what you just said, put things in a context so that we understand so that we can understand the history of the moment and things like that. And I always tell my students there's a cheat code in my class, right? That if you don't know the answer, you can always say it depends on context, and you'll be right. For you, it seems to me what you're saying is in the Middle East, that's more true than anywhere else. Everything depends on the context. In a world of 30-second sound bites, how do you work with reporters to help them to be able to put things in a context that goes back 5,000 years?
In this news cycle, I've been really struggling with that because there's so much breaking news, there's so much immediacy. We're not stopping to really think about how we got here. And I do think we need to find forums, and this show is a great one. This place, WGBH, right here, PBS, I think it's the best shot we have to find that sense of an ability to have context. I think the New York Times has brought a lot of history forward, and I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to learn online right now and understand this is a very complicated, layered history. Both sides have suffered greatly. And in this moment, right now, yes, it begins with condemning an incredibly barbaric attack by Hamas, but we also have to care about the loss of innocent lives among Palestinians as they're underneath this rubble now caused by the airstrikes coming from Israel.
If the context is that important and you need a depth to really understand the issues and the people involved, what's the book you would tell our listeners to read?
Beirut to Jerusalem by our friend.
So you took the one I was going to recommend, Beirut to Jerusalem.
Yeah. I think it is probably the single best book in this moment in particular to think about and to go through as you really look at that. And that is, it stands. It stands as a way to understand the moment. I do think some of the books about the peace process are important because the expansion of settlements and how they undercut the peace process and created the despair is important. Hamas, we have to remember, was elected in 2006, I believe it is.
Yeah.
But before that, they were very small. They were almost out of business. The Israelis and Palestinians were working together until Bibi Netanyahu's cabinet tried to kill Mashal, the political officer. That really propelled Hamas into a new level of engagement with the community, especially in Gaza. Layer upon layer, I think Beirut to Jerusalem, Tom Friedman's book, takes us so far. But it's really important to understand how the peace process unraveled. And I think actually there's some self-effacing moment for the United States to think about, did we do enough to make sure that peace process worked? And I think the clear answer in the moment we're in is no, we did not.
On that note, Charlie, I'm sure that's not the last time we'll be talking about this. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.